in residency, it seems to be less about education. It is still about education, but it's much more about using you as cheap labor because you're subsidized by Medicare, and why hire more NPs and PAs and nurses when we can just have this cheaper resident do a lot of the work? Christian Poulos, MD, Why I Quit Medicine, the truth about burnout, debt, and purpose.
Medical school changes people. Some come out confident with a superhero complex and an encyclopedic knowledge of medications that end with lol. Others emerge looking like someone who just survived a hostage situation. I kind of fall somewhere in between. It did not break me, it just rearranged my brain into a version of myself I never expected. When I entered medical school at the University of Illinois Chicago in 2019, I thought I was signing up for a noble path of helping people. I managed myself diagnosing rare conditions in hallways, saving lives dramatically, and high-fiving grateful patients as the inspirational background music played.
Of course, we've all seen that medical TV show drama, right?
I believed in the system. I believed in the mission. I even believed orthosurgery was calling my name like a true bro.
Of course, because your step score determines which specialties are open to you. Your bench press determines whether or not ortho will take you. And for me, obviously, ortho wouldn't take me. My bench press is way too low.
Then reality showed up with an N95 mask and said, nope. The first 2 years of medical school tricked me into thinking I had everything figured out. COVID arrived and everything transitioned online. What could have destroyed my education actually made it better. I studied on my own schedule. I stopped pretending I needed 8 hours of lectures to understand hypertension. I spent more time in the gym than in the library, which is hilarious considering the price tag of medical school.
So my experience in med school, so I started med school in 2012 and I went to UC San Diego. Over there, lectures weren't mandatory, and many students, I say maybe, I don't know the exact proportion, maybe a quarter, a half, simply weren't showing up to lecture. So you have lecture and then small group. Small group is mandatory. It's like you and 8, 10 other students, and that's like PBL, things like that. But lecture, a lot of people acknowledge it's not the most effective way to learn. So oftentimes we would still arrive at the medical school at 8 o'clock, which is when the lectures would start. But rather than going to the lecture hall, we would just go to empty PBL rooms and then self-study using higher yield resources. Now, not every medical school is like this, but more and more schools tend to understand that there are better ways to learn rather than just being lectured at by PhDs and people that have never practiced medicine that are going way too in the weeds anyways.
I got engaged. I built a coaching business. I posted content daily and watched it grow. I traveled and convinced myself it was part of personal development. I got into the best shape of my life while memorizing the Krebs cycle for like the 5th time.
Do we have to memorize the Krebs cycle in med school? I think that was only in pre-med, unless I'm misremembering, because it has been a minute for me.
During those first 2 years of med school, I discovered time efficiency. Efficiency so intense that if there were 10 free seconds in my day, I would squeeze productivity into them like a lunatic.
I can relate.
Flashcards ruled my existence. On the train, flashcards. Between sets, flashcards.
Between sets, dude, I tried that. I actually tried it maybe like 4, 5, 6 times. And I decided that was a line I wasn't willing to cross because you, at least for me, you want to be focused in the gym. You're in a different mindset. You have your music playing, and going to flashcards would break that concentration. I know I look like DYEL, but I was very regular about my strength training, and I usually did it after, in my first 2 years, after morning lectures and small group. So right around lunchtime, I would go to the gym. And it's just such a good practice because it helps you with stress reduction. It helps you maintain a better mindset. It was just like, for mental health, strength training was clutch for me.
Power walking to the bathroom because coffee is a cruel friend. Flashcards before and after. My fiance at the time, now my wife, would drive us somewhere and I would stare at my phone absorbing medical trivia like my life depended on knowing the 6 causes of metabolic alkalosis.
So I do Thanksgiving with my extended family, and my younger cousin reminds me that there were a couple of years there, especially during like step 1 prep, because this is before step 1 was pass fail. And also during like my 3rd year rotation when I was trying to crush my clinical rotations and honor and whatnot, that I would do flashcards at their house while we were hanging around and waiting for dinner to be served. A bit extreme.
That hustle gave me a dangerous sense of invincibility. Then 3rd year hit, and the hospital erased my delusions with the precision of a bone saw. Your clinical years are when medical school stops being academic and becomes an elaborate psychological experiment. You go from being a person with hobbies and relationships to someone who reports at 4:30 a.m. to update a progress note that no one reads, so a resident can present it to an attending who already knows the plan. It is theatrical medicine, a never-ending group project where your grade depends entirely on how much the tired stranger above you likes your attitude.
It's funny, but it's actually more sad than funny. Your 3rd year grades are very important to getting into residency because your first 2 years are generally pass fail, and 3rd year clerkships you get honors, pass, or honors, high pass, pass fail. And because it is so subjective, it's kind of luck of the draw. Sometimes you can get lucky or unlucky because someone's cool and chill versus not. And sometimes just based on your background or things you can't change, like your ethnicity or your gender, etc., they may also like you more or less. There was one instance, I remember this one surgeon who I could just sense that she wasn't the biggest fan of me. And I'm like, what can I do differently? I want to study more. I want to know all the answers that I can reasonably, but while still remaining humble and be open-minded. I actually had someone that I rotated with her previously, and he was like, oh, dude, she's just hella anti-male. I'm like, what do you mean? And the surgeon, I guess she was very gung-ho about more women surgeons. Cool, nothing wrong with that. But it got to the point where she would actually be kind of anti-male. And my buddy who had rotated with her previously said that with him and the other guy, she just wasn't vibing. And with me too, she also clearly wasn't a fan. Whereas the one girl I was rotating with at the same time, she was a big fan. So it's unfortunate, but people have biases. Some people are kind of shitty and they think it's okay to discriminate based on things like ethnicity or gender or factors that you just can't control. It really should just be based on your attitude, your knowledge, your professionalism, things like that. But it is pretty fucked up. Like there is this subjective basis to it. Luckily for me and for my buddy, there were many other surgeons we worked with that did not have those issues, and we were able to honor our surgery rotations.
Internal medicine was the darkest part of my journey. I had a rotation that made me question whether there should be warning labels on hospital doors. Every morning I would wake up before the sun, peel myself out of bed, and genuinely wonder if I could fake my own death convincingly enough to avoid rounds. Instead, I would go into the hospital and occasionally sneak into the bathroom to cry silently. True story. The bathroom became a safe space, which is honestly a red flag about the whole profession and my experience in general. Then I would wipe my eyes, adjust my short white coat, and re-enter the fluorescent battlefield pretending everything was fine.
Yeah, internal medicine can be polarizing. Rounding is pretty brutal, especially on certain days. You'll start at like 7 and end at like 1 p.m. No joke, it's crazy. People outside of internal medicine would call it mental masturbation, how it's like unnecessary to really debate over the minutia of some, esoteric study that is kind of related to this instance and how we need to think about antibiotics in general and yada, yada. But it is cool because you are solving the medical puzzles on internal medicine, on the wards at least, which I personally think was kind of cool. But obviously you're not doing as many procedures. Although my internal medicine resident was a super cool guy. He let us practice IVs on him. And one of his buddies also was letting the med students practice IVs on them. And that person got septic. So after his co-resident got septic, he's like, yeah, we're not doing this anymore. So we all stopped practicing the IVs.
It was during these months that I learned that healthcare is not the pure service to humanity that I imagined. It really is a business, a complicated, bureaucratic, bottom-line obsessed business whose primary motivation is financial survival. Decisions that should have been made for patient well-being were often made for billing codes. Insurance companies were the puppeteers pulling strings attached to every treatment option.
My experience is a bit different. So if Christian here is talking about how a lot of treatment decisions were made for financial incentives versus the pure, like, we're only going to be focusing on what's best for the patient, I actually think that from what I saw, it was more in this area. The issue was that sometimes insurance companies would not approve prior auths, and that is a huge headache. And as a patient myself with ulcerative colitis, I can tell you it is a huge headache to get authorization for life-saving medications and treatments. But maybe I was lucky or maybe just naive. I saw a lot of doctors talking about the best possible care they could provide. And they would sometimes be frustrated with insurance companies, but it never seemed to be actually guiding their care. The reality of insurance denying their requests, that is one problem that we sometimes faced. But it wasn't like, oh, we need to do these other things in order to make more money in the situation. Now, when it came to charting and using Epic, yes, there are a lot of buttons you have to press and yada, yada, yada to maximize your billing, which is a whole nother headache. But where I trained and the doctors that I was surrounded with, we all took it very seriously. If you are being treated by pharmaceutical companies with gifts or vacations, etc., like, you have to say no. That's going to influence your actual care with patients. So you don't ever do that. And you always want to do what's best for the patient.
I witnessed approval processes that looked like comedy sketches if they weren't so infuriating. A patient needed a critical imaging study. Insurance refused because they had not tried conservative management, which is code for come back when you're sicker.
Another thing that'll happen there is the insurance companies will sometimes not approve something like a CT unless they first do an x-ray, and you know that the x-ray is not going to show anything or will be useless in the situation. There's all these like A lot of silly nonsense.
Meanwhile, people's illnesses progressed. The longer I stood inside the belly of the beast, the more obvious the flaws became. We wait for people to break, then congratulate ourselves for patching them up. Preventative care is treated like a hobby. Any approach that keeps people strong, functional, and thriving is dismissed as not evidence-based enough, until the evidence finally arrives 10 years too late.
Oh, evidence-based medicine. I was just speaking with a sleep medicine doctor. He was over. We were actually collaborating on some new stuff, so stay tuned for that. Exciting things coming. And dude, evidence-based medicine is so often misunderstood, even by doctors themselves. And Christian is pointing to the same issue, which is that oftentimes they will want to make decisions based on super robust evidence. And evidence-based medicine doesn't mean you do nothing until you have really strong evidence to do something. Evidence-based medicine is using clinical judgment, patient preference, and the best possible literature that we currently have. Now, how this is misinterpreted, many people will think that you should not do something unless there is very strong evidence to support it. But there's a risk to any action. There's also a risk to any inaction. And I wish that more people wouldn't misunderstand what evidence-based medicine is. And I talk about how my GI doctor misunderstands evidence-based medicine with vitamin D supplementation with ulcerative colitis in another video. And it's just like, as humans, we like to think black and white because it's easier, but the truth is never black and white.
The system does not reward long-term health. It rewards high-cost interventions and chronic disease management. It rewards being busy, not effective. And then there was residency staring at me in the face like a looming prison sentence. The expectation was pretty clear. After 4 years of relentless effort and astronomical debt, the reward would be several more years of working brutal hours for low pay while pretending this was a privilege. Residents normalize surviving on caffeine and a handful of almonds between the millions of patients they have to see. They brag about how little they slept, as if being barely conscious improves medical judgment. They are told they are being trained, though much of the time they function as underpaid labor, keeping hospitals running 24/7. It is not hazing, technically, but if a fraternity made you work 30-hour shifts caring for critically ill people, there would be congressional hearings. The cultural mantra is simple: sacrifice now so you can live later. The problem is that later keeps moving. I saw attending physicians, 15 years in their careers, still convincing themselves their joy was right around the corner after just one more promotion, one more committee assignment, one more soul-crushing year.
Okay, so keep in mind, for those med students out there, the doctors, like Christian here, is working with these other attending physicians. Those attending physicians are in academia by definition because you are in training, and the doctors who are working with you in training are at academic institutions. So there are a lot of physicians who are not in academia. Now, the motivations and the types of people that go for private practice versus community versus academia and so on, they're going to be different. I don't want you to think that your life is going to be just like the academic physician's life because most physicians aren't in academia. So keep that in mind. It's a very common misconception amongst medical students. But yes, in residency, it seems to be less about education. It is still about education, but it's much more about using you as cheap labor because you're subsidized by Medicare, and why hire more NPs and PAs and nurses when we can just have this cheaper resident do a lot of the work? Residents put up with it because it's really hard to become a doctor. Once you get through med school, you have debt, you need to pay that off. You need a high-paying job as an attending physician, making an average of $374,000 per year as of this recording. And truthfully, there are not many jobs that if you follow the path, you're guaranteed to make low to mid to sometimes even high six figures. So yeah, medical trainees on average put up with a lot of nonsense because at the end of the tunnel, as an attending physician, you make really good money. And once you are an attending physician, you can be happy. You don't have to be like these doctors that Christian is referring to, where they felt like even as attendings, they had to keep leveling up and getting promotions and committee assignments and whatnot.
Meanwhile, I was accumulating another uncomfortable realization. Not everyone wants to be helped. Not in the way that I wanted to help them. Patients would come asking for improvements, but reject any actionable change. Suggest a daily walk, and sometimes the room would be filled with objections.
Yeah, man, because people in America oftentimes want a magic pill rather than any kind of lifestyle intervention, even if the lifestyle intervention is far more effective.
Recommend cutting back on alcohol and suddenly you're the villain. Propose improving nutrition and they behave like you banned happiness. People want solutions, not responsibility. They want shortcuts, not habits. There are exceptions that give you hope. There's plenty of people out there who take control and do improve dramatically, but the percentage felt too small for me to ignore. I wanted to spend my career working with people who show up ready to change, not the ones waiting for miracles while refusing instructions. There were smaller absurdities too, like my first time scrubbing into an OBGYN surgery. When I finally completed the process of scrubbing incorrectly for the first time, I casually said perfect to the resident that I had befriended. The attending surgeon turned to me with the seriousness of a judge preparing a life sentence and delivered a 10-minute lecture about how perfection is impossible and I should not throw that word around. This was literally about hand washing. Soap and water. It does not require a philosophical debate.
Dude, some people, both inside and outside of medicine, just take their lives way too seriously. And don't worry, that's not the norm. At least that's not the norm that I've experienced.
Yet there I stood, nodding respectfully while dying inside. By the time I discovered PM&R, a specialty focused on restoring function and performance, I felt like there might be a version of medicine where people are not just surviving their diseases and actually wanting to reclaim their lives. I applied, I interviewed, I smiled professionally, I played the part of the enthusiastic future resident. But internally, a voice kept growing louder. Is this the life you want? Or just the one you signed up for before you knew any better? One afternoon, after a long shift of witnessing exhausted residents and reluctant patients and endless bureaucracy, I stopped pretending. I withdrew my residency application. No major roadmap for myself, no guaranteed income for the long term, no applause from the system I was stepping away from. What I did receive was unexpected human support. Classmates told me they admired my decision, even envied it. Some people admitted privately that they wished they could leave, but felt trapped by debt and expectation. Doctors I had worked with years earlier reached out to say that I made the right choice.
I remember when I shared my decision as well, I was shocked by the various responses, overwhelming support, and many people in residency, co-residents and such, who said similar things like, wow, really brave, wish I could do the same, et cetera, et cetera. But keep in mind, residents saying that they're currently in the most challenging years of training. So that is going to skew their perspective. Most people were supportive, and the only couple people that were like, dude, you should really reconsider, it was actually someone who I was very close with in med school. And she had seen how much I loved plastic surgery, how much it energized me, and how I wasn't sure what I wanted to do before third year. And then during third year, I was like, oh my God, I found the fit. This fits me like a glove. And she was like, dude, I just can't imagine you not doing plastics. This lit you up like nothing else. But many other people, even some attendings, were supportive of the decision. But keep in mind, I also did have my businesses already building a lot of momentum, and I had the business plans and those things. So it wasn't like, let's jump ship, hop off a cliff and build the airplane on the way down. There already was something that was waiting for me and that had some level of momentum.
They saw the system from the inside at its highest level and agreed it was not designed for the kind of impact I wanted to make. Medical school did change me, just not academically in the way admissions brochures promise. Sure, I learned physiology, pathology, pharmacology, how to interpret labs and differentiate rashes, but it's not what shaped me. Medical school taught me discipline, like true discipline, the kind where you keep going even when the reward is unclear and the motivation is buried under exhaustion. It taught me efficiency. If you want something enough, you can create time for it. It taught me resilience. 5 a.m., 6 a.m. rounds will toughen your spirit or destroy it, sometimes on alternating days. It taught me that suffering alone in silence is not noble. And it taught me that if you ignore burnout long enough, it becomes your personality. But most importantly, medical school taught me what matters to me. I want to help people avoid the hospital, not help the hospital fill beds. I want to work with people who value their long-term health enough to take action before disaster strikes. I want a system where changing your lifestyle is celebrated more than refilling a prescription. I want medicine to feel empowering, not transactional. I still believe in healing. I just do not believe the current system is designed to deliver it well.
There are many issues with the current medical system in the US and with every country, actually, just different pros and cons. One of the things that does bother me, as Christian is alluding to here, is the financial incentives and the structure to not focus on preventive medicine, but to reward procedures and medications and things after it's already happened. So I love with Medicine 3.0, we've covered Peter Attia's book summary. You can find that linked below. That goes over what is Medicine 3.0, what is a better way of approaching medicine and health, which is more focus on prevention. Right? You can't live a life with terrible lifestyle and have CAD and metabolic dysfunction and all these things, and then at 60 years old be like, yo, can we reverse this? You need to start earlier. You need to start decades earlier by building those good habits. And if you're like me, high risk with genetically determined Lp(a) being super high, okay, let's get you on some statins or some PCSK9 inhibitors or bempedoic acid, things that will reduce your risk so that when you are 50, 60, 70 years old, hopefully you're not having a heart attack. I cover all that again in that book summary, which you can find linked below. Very proud of that video. I think a lot of you will find that highly, highly valuable.
Some will say that leaving this traditional path means abandoning my training. I disagree. The system did not create my passion for helping people improve. It only revealed I would need to pursue that passion on a different path. I left not because I could not handle the grind, but because I saw where that grind leads, and it just wasn't where I wanted to go. Medical school changed me by showing me exactly who I do not want to become. It opened my eyes to the flaws of a system that waits until people are broken to take them seriously. It toughened me up, forced me to grow, and made me painfully aware of the cost of complacency. I still believe in helping others. I still believe in a lot of the medical system. Now I'm just determined to do it while also helping myself. So here I am. I am not an orthopedic surgeon, not a resident trudging through another sleepless shift. Instead, I'm an MD who understands the value of health because I nearly sacrificed mine for a system that mistakes burnout for dedication. I want a career built on optimizing life, not managing decline. Med school pushed me to that realization. And for that, I am actually grateful. Slightly traumatized, but mostly grateful.
Now, I want to leave you with one last thing, especially for the pre-med and med students out there. You may be feeling like there's a new doctor who's quitting every other week, and that's a bias in perception because of social media. So even before social media, I think I made one of the first ever I quit medicine videos in 2018, I think, and we've seen many since. But guess what? Before that, before YouTube, before Instagram, there still were many, many doctors quitting every single year and doing different careers, entrepreneurship, consulting, etc. Consulting actually especially back then, was very, very common. But people just weren't talking about it, at least not in a public setting like this. Now, if you are a med student, a resident, or an attending physician, and you're not fully fulfilled and satisfied in clinical medicine, I don't think you always have to quit. For some people, quitting is absolutely the right call. For other people, not so much. But if you want to supplement your clinical income, have diversified income streams, and maybe reduce some of your clinical hours, then check out the Physician Income Accelerator. It shows you how to get from where you are currently to where you aren't fully reliant on your clinical income and you have greater optionality in your life. Check it out, linked below, and I'll see you in the next one.